I recently put out a video talking about how 120,000 Canadians are leaving the country, record numbers, fastest pace in the last 74 years. And I got a lot of responses, a lot of people nodding along saying, yep, I've been thinking about it too. And some people already have one foot out the door. But I also got a question I wasn't expecting as much. What about you? You talk about Hamilton, you talk about Canada. Why are you staying? And yes, I am staying. And I want to give you some context on why that answer means something coming from me specifically, because I'm not someone who just lived in a city their whole life and never thought about going anywhere else. I was born in British Columbia. I grew up in Northern Ontario, spent a few years in Ottawa. I was in Montreal for 10 years, then in Toronto for 12 years. And in between all of that, I spent years as a musician, touring internationally, touring across Canada, playing shows in countries that most people never get to visit. I've seen quite a bit of the world, and I've seen most of Canada, and I chose to live in Hamilton. That's what this video is about. To be upfront with something first, I am a real estate agent in Hamilton, so you could easily look at this video and say, of course, I'm going to tell you that Hamilton's great. That's my business. Fair. But the thing is, I moved my family here, not a client, not a referral. My wife, my child, we made a decision for the same reasons most families make. We needed it to make sense for us financially, practically, and in terms of how we wanted to live our day-to-day life. And unlike a lot of people who moved to Hamilton because they got priced out of Toronto and didn't have many other options, I had a different kind of reference point. I'd lived in multiple cities across Canada. I've been to other countries on tour. I know what different places feel like and what they have to offer. So when I tell you that Hamilton won, I'm not saying it because it's the only thing I knew. I'm saying it because I actually compared it to a lot of other options. So by the time I was seriously thinking about leaving Toronto, I wasn't making that decision as someone who only knew one city. I'd already lived in a lot of different versions of the Canadian life. Toronto was where my music career was based for a long time. It's where things were happening, where the industry was, where I felt I needed to be if I were building something for that world. And for a long time, that made sense. But life changes, technology changes, and priorities shift. So when my family became the focus instead of my career, and even if it was, I no longer feel like I would have to be there to be part of the scene. Toronto started to feel like it was designed for a version of my life that I could move on from. The cost of everything, the commute, the sense that you're constantly fighting for space, whether that's in traffic or a grocery store or in a park on a Sunday afternoon. I love Trinity Bellwoods, but it's packed. And the housing math just broke it all down. We weren't looking for a condo anymore. We wanted a house, a yard, with some room to grow. And in Toronto, that conversation was either going to cut us out of everything or push us so far out that the commute would just make the whole thing pointless. So we started looking elsewhere. And this is why Hamilton won. I started looking at 3 cities seriously: Barrie, Oshawa, and Hamilton. Barrie made sense on paper. It was affordable, decent-sized city. I grew up in the north, so I could deal with a little bit more winter. But you're giving up the proximity to Toronto because the 400's a nightmare. And frankly, for what you get, the value equation just wasn't as strong. Oshawa was in the running, but if you've ever been to Oshawa, you probably know why. The lifestyle and amenities were just not matching up for what we were looking for. But Hamilton was different. The amount of inventory available, even then, was significantly better than we're seeing in a lot of other comparable markets. The price point gave us options that actually felt like options and not compromises. We could look at a detached house and think, yeah, we could actually do this. There's a yard. But it wasn't just the numbers. Every time we drove around Hamilton to look at houses, there was something about the city that felt like it had its own thing going on. It wasn't trying to be Toronto. It wasn't positioning itself as Toronto's little brother. It had its own identity, its own art scene, its own food scene, and that mattered more to us than we expected. And here's where I want to be honest about some of the surprises, because I think this is the part that's hardest to explain to someone who hasn't spent time here. I knew it was affordable, and I knew the proximity to Toronto was good, and the housing stock was better for the money. Those were the things I was expecting. But what I didn't expect was how friendly people were here, genuinely. It's the kind of place where you meet your neighbors and they actually know your name, and it has that small town feel, but also with the big city amenities. I didn't expect the food scene either. Hamilton has restaurants that can hold their own against anything in Toronto, probably because a lot of people come here from there to start their own places. And the people running them care about what they're doing. There's a James Street North energy that's legitimately creative and not manufactured. I didn't expect how much is just going on in general The run clubs, the art scene, the events, the sports, the outdoors, the escarpment, waterfalls, the trails, anywhere in the city. Hamilton has its own world, and it's not looking over its shoulder at Toronto wondering what it's missing. If you want to know what I genuinely miss about Toronto, it's just kind of the big city vibe that I don't even notice until I go back. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I do miss it here a bit. And that's fine. It's always there for when I need. But I also know what it costs, not just financially, but in terms of how you live and how much space you have in your day and how much room there is to breathe. And then I drive home to Hamilton and I think about what I traded it for, the space, the pace, the fact that my child can exist in a city without everything being in production, and it doesn't compare. But back to the bigger question. I watched the data, about 120,000 Canadians leaving, and I get it. The frustration is real, the cost of living, the sense that the systems aren't working as we maybe remember them, or maybe we romanticize them, or, things have changed for sure. But I've actually been to a lot of places people are talking about moving to, not just as a tourist, but someone who spent time in these cities and seen day-to-day life. And the honest truth is every place has a version of the same problems. The countries that look attractive from the outside, the US, Portugal, Spain, the UAE, Mexico, they all have their own version of expensive housing, strained system, corruption, political volatility, and a gap between what the marketing looks like and what the daily life actually feels like once you've been there for 6 months or a year. A lot of Canadians are going to move abroad, spend the first year feeling like they made the right call, and spend the second year figuring out what they gave up that they didn't realize they had. Most of the things that make Canada worth living are invisible until they're gone. Healthcare that's there when something goes wrong, even if you have to wait a little bit. The level of physical safety that you stop noticing because it's always been there. A social fabric that compared to a lot of places people are rushing to is genuinely intact. I'm not saying don't leave if leaving is genuinely the right call for your situation, but I think a lot of people are making an emotional decision based on how Canada feels right now and the echo chamber of social media that they're in, rather than on a clear-eyed comparison of what they're actually trading it for. For me, after everything I've seen and everywhere I've been, the answer wasn't leaving Canada. I was just leaving the part of Canada that was making my life harder than it needed to be. If you're in that place right now, done with Toronto, not sure where to land, I put together a free neighborhood guide for Hamilton that breaks down the different areas of the city in a way that's useful. And what I tell people who are sitting on the fence and exactly where I was a few years ago, Toronto feels like it's getting kind of old. The money doesn't stretch the way it used to. They're thinking about a family or they've already got one and the city isn't just set up for what they need anymore. And they looked at maybe leaving the country. What I tell them is this: before you buy a plane ticket, drive to Hamilton on a Saturday morning, walk around Locke Street, drive through Westdale, go look at a detached house, go for a hike, and just compare to what it costs in Mississauga or Etobicoke. Have something to eat on James Street, and then ask yourself if the problem is Canada or if the problem is just where you've been living right now. Maybe you've outgrown it. And for most people that I've had a conversation with, the answer becomes pretty clear.